Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, Pakistan. This program is going to be English because I will be interviewing Murtaza Hussain of the Intercept. And for all my viewers and listeners in Pakistan and overseas, Assalamu alaikum. And thank you for watching, for your comments, criticism, and for your feedback. I really appreciate that. To my patrons who support us, thank you very much. And I start with a prayer from Prophet Moses, as they say in English. Oh Lord, expand my breast, make my task easier, untie my tongue so my task becomes easier. My guest today, Murtaza Hussain from the Intercept. Murtaza, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me here.
Thank you, Murtaza. Thank you so much for having me. Murtaza, I just wanted to start first, just to introduce you, and I know people know you really well, but you're the national security correspondent for the Intercept. And we have found in Pakistan, certainly, we owe, I think, a great debt to your publication, to your newspaper, and I strongly recommend all those who are watching this show, and if they want to really know the core truth, unvarnished, they should go to the Intercept, read it, support it. It's a user supported. This is a genuine plug. I have no financial interest in the Intercept, but I think the Intercept media houses like the Intercept need the support of people so they can get unvarnished, non-corporate driven, non-government supported, biased media. So this is the kind of headlines you guys do. You're talking about the displacement of Palestinians. You're talking about the new arms sales bill by Ilhan Omar, etc. So I strongly urge people to support the Intercept, and please go to their website. There's a donation button. Please do that. And like I said again, I have no financial interest in the Intercept. So thank you so much for being there, Murtaza. Murtaza, we want to start first with something that's shaken the airwaves in Pakistan, which is the uh, l- article written by Imran Khan in The Economist, in which he literally strips everyone, without their clothes. I know you've read it. So what's your view on the article?
What's interesting to me is that The Economist published the article by Imran Khan. Obviously, I
Hmm.
haven't heard a lot from him since he's been in jail. It's interesting how little interest there's been actually in him since he's been incarcerated, even though he's still a very relevant and popular political figure in Pakistan. So the timing of publishing this letter by Mr. Khan was very interesting. And as you said, he really pulls no punches. He is quite he's as defiant as he was when he was out of prison, in the sense of
Hmm. Hmm.
thoughts on the military establishment in Pakistan, as well as his civilian political rivals in Pakistan, particularly Nawaz Sharif. Um, he alludes to the fact that PTI is still very popular in Pakistan, and he's talking about the ongoing attempts to sort of suppress his party while he's out of the picture. So, all those things kind of are expected to be heard from him, I would say, in a way. But it's interesting he's been giving this hearing in a very, very important publication, which is important and has the ear of many elites in the Anglophone world, which is, probably the most important audience to be having the ear of. So that was fascinating. It shows that he's clearly by no means forgotten or no longer a factor when people think about Pakistan.
So Murtaza, you're right. The Economist is very careful of who they publish and what they publish. Why do you think they chose to publish this now?
It's hard to speculate, but I
Yes.
think that the right now, obviously, elections seem to be coming up in Pakistan, and he's fighting very hard to be included in the elections. And I will say this is a very, very important aspect: is that Pakistan has a very big diaspora in the U.S. and Canada and the U.K., other countries. And the diaspora is very influential in many ways. Very a lot of educated people, people with money, and so forth. And Imran Khan is very popular in the diaspora, and that's not even value judgment. It's just a observation that he's very popular. And people in the diaspora are still pushing, in like the way they can do in Pakistan because of the political climate, for recognition of his party, recognition of his legal status, and so forth. So in that light, I think they're responding to probably demands from British society and American society to hear about the subject. Because as much as I think U.S. leaders and Pakistan's current leaders would like to move past this chapter, there are a lot of people who are still very invested in him and his fate and the fate of his party. And of course, a letter from him laying out his analysis would be of great interest to those people who still, in many, many ways, are a vocal constituency in favor of Imran Khan and the PTI.
Hmm. So it's interesting that in this article, like you said, he pulled no punches and he's actually made no excuses or diluted any of his positions. I mean, he in this article he makes about 20 points, but the one that really interested me was the one about the cipher, in which he actually directly targets the U.S. administration, the Department of State, for having orchestrated or facilitated his removal through General Bajwa. And that is a very interesting perspective. Do you think the Economist let it go for some reason, or could they have edited that out?
Well, it's interesting that he put that in there, and interesting he laid out his reasons for believing that he was removed as a result of U.S. pressure. And I think it's very important that we no longer have to just take his word for it. We can read the cipher, we can read the whole text of it on the Intercept website we published in August, and judge for yourself if it shows pressure from the U.S. side to remove him from power. And regardless of, I think we have to conclude that it does show that pressure, and that pressure, whether it was decisive or not, people can debate and dispute. I think it does show very strongly, evidence of significant, probably influential pressure on Pakistani elites to remove him in a vote of no confidence in 2022. But you can see, and he talked about it in that essay in The Economist. And that's very interesting because some people suggested that he dropped this subject as not really being relevant to
Hmm.
his removal, but clearly that's not the case. He does see it as very relevant. And
Hmm.
it's interesting because normally, if you're trying to appeal to U.S. elite support, you wouldn't bring that up. But I think he's appealing to Pakistanis. He's appealing to Pakistanis, his supporters, and probably those in the diaspora who are concerned about the fact that maybe a very popular prime minister may have been removed as a result of foreign interference in Pakistani
Hmm.
politics. I think that's probably why he brought it up.
Hmm. So what's a kind of a outcome of this? Do you think the foreign policy makers, the elite in government, the State Department, Pentagon, defense, do you think this will influence in some form, shape, or the other American foreign policy towards Pakistan or their position on Pakistan?
Well, it's interesting if you think about the U.S. national security establishment, the political establishment. It's not a
Hmm.
monolith. There are people with different views on many different subjects, including Pakistan, and those views are in competition with each other. So, oftentimes people will praise or condemn the U.S. for doing one thing or another, but really it's just that competition of different institutional voices, and
Hmm.
one voice wins out over the other in a certain time. So, Imran Khan was pretty critical of the U.S. when he was in power. His whole political career started off by criticizing drone strikes. In fact, so he's
Hmm.
always been a very long-standing critic of the U.S. And despite that, I think that there are still probably people in the U.S. establishment who, view maybe him favorably, or they are sympathetic to his political plight, his legal plight. Now that he's effectively, and some would say, a political prisoner in Pakistan to keep me out of the elections. They're committed to what they say about democracy, even when the democracy is not maybe something politically in their favor in the short term. And maybe they're sympathetic. Maybe they'd like to see more transparency and information. And certainly, I'd like to see more from the US perspective in the months ahead about this subject. What I would say ultimately is that, he's still around. He's clearly still seen as relevant, as you can see in this Economist article decision to publish him. And I think in Pakistan, you can see people who are in jail one day are prime minister the next day. And I think that
Hmm.
the U.S.
Hmm.
would like to keep ties with Imran Khan in some way and
Hmm.
his supporters because there's such a large and vocal constituency. And I noticed in the U.S. there are a lot of Pakistani Americans who push really hard on their elected representatives to ensure, what they see as democracy and fair elections in Pakistan, which would include some voice of Imran Khan and his party. So I wouldn't be surprised if people in the U.S. are responding to constituent politicians and so forth are responding to their constituents' pressure about the subject. So, I don't think Imran Khan is finished. I think that his political career, even if he doesn't partake in these elections, uh, probably still has some ways to go.
Hmm. Thank you, Murtaza. Murtaza, I'm just sharing this from your newspaper. The new bill aims to block U.S. arms sales to Saudi Arabia amid concerns of regional conflict. And I want to bring in here three issues: the bombing in Beirut and the killing of the Hezbollah leader, the Houthis, what they're doing in the Red Sea, and this new statement by the US and 11 other countries, and what's happened in Iran in the Kerman bombing, where people say close to 100 lives were lost. And this region is hotting up. What's your view on this?
Well, it's very sobering because if you think about it, probably more Palestinians will be killed than have been killed in decades in the last month or
Hmm,
so. Well,
hmm,
for 3 months since the conflict started, and likewise, more Israelis were killed in both intifadas in the last in one day, actually, on October
hmm,
2nd. So all the terrible consequences of the Israel-Palestine conflict that existed over 7 decades are being magnified and compressed in the period of a much, much shorter time. So this issue, which really destabilized the entire Middle East, maybe even you could say the Muslim world in some sense, it destabilized the relations of the West. That's happening all over again, but much worse. And we're actually seeing a lot more of it. Every day, day by day, we're seeing videos of dead children in Gaza and so forth. It's surely going to antagonize and upset people and going to create much more political volatility. And as you alluded to, this could very much become a regional war. It could become a regional war involving Lebanon, Yemen, Iran, other countries, Jordan perhaps as well too, and maybe more countries even besides that.
hmm,
I think, unfortunately, it's very difficult to say, but I think that's likely outcome. In fact, it's the way things are going at the moment. I don't think anybody wants a war like that, but a war can still happen like that, despite that. And I think that Israel is hoping that right now, while it still has the opportunity to potentially draw the U.S. in as a supporter of, let's say, a war against Lebanon or Hezbollah, it's going to take that advantage, provoke them into attacking them in a way which allows them to escalate further, and it could get really bad. It could get reach the stage of reoccupation of parts of Lebanon, or significant destruction in Israel from long range missiles and so forth. And it certainly, I don't know where it's going to end, but the second that this began, it really did strike me this could be the war people had been warning of for many, many decades that could take place in the Middle East between Israel and the network of Iranian proxies groups that exist throughout the Arab world, and even directly within Iran itself.
So, Murtaza, do you sense that the deliberate bombing of Beirut and the Hezbollah killing and the Iran bombing may actually be attempts to draw them into a regional conflict so that so that the US steps in?
Yes, I think that's very possible that
Mm,
that could be the case because it's very provocative to cross. The bombing Beirut really crossed the red line that Hezbollah had articulated before, because they also didn't want to keep the conflict, have it go above a certain threshold where Beirut would likely be destroyed, they'd lose thousands of people on their own side. But now they're being sort of put in a corner where they have to retaliate in a way. And then after they did that, after Israel did that, they escalated further by bombing southern Lebanon and killing some
mm.
Hezbollah officials. Very next day, today there was a killing of by the U.S. of an Iraqi militia commander in Baghdad
Yes.
as well too. The bombing that took place in Kerman at Qasim Soleimani's memorial.
Hmm.
Say exactly, in fact, because ISIS has claimed responsibility for it, but it's a very murky and shadowy business. No one really knows what that means in some sense. So there could be other things behind it. And Israel, this is only speculation, and this anyone could take it or leave. Israel had ties documented in the past with Sunni extremist groups operating in Iran, which are hostile to the government. Jund Allah was one of them.
Mhm.
So I don't know. That's why people are speculating about these things. It's something that we never really know who operates these terrorist groups in many cases to the end. There's a very interesting book, excellent book by a gentleman named Ronen Bergman. He's an Israeli journalist who also writes for the New York Times now. He wrote in the 80s, Israel operated fake terrorist groups in Lebanon, which carried out bombings targeting civilians for a very long time. That was considered a conspiracy theory until many years later when Ronen wrote this book and you revealed that actually, it was true and the Mossad was operating these groups. So just because a terrorist group with no clear, information claims responsibility for something, I don't necessarily say it's true or not. I just say I don't know, and I will take that in this situation, absent the unlikely emergence of clear evidence pointing one way or another. So, certainly many people in Iran will interpret this as an attack by Israel, and some have already said as much.
Hmm. So, going on to another aspect of the regional conflict, the Houthis, they just published this picture of the people who died, and they've suddenly emerged on the scene as a very strong power. Why is this happening? How are they doing it? And do you think that the Yemen adventure that Saudi Arabia embarked upon by Mohammed bin Salman is kind of is dead now?
Well, that's a very interesting question because it seemed like that Abraham Accords program was about to add Saudi Arabia. It was very, very close to adding that.
Hmm.
Arguably,
Hmm.
the whole reason for the Hamas attack was to stop that.
Hmm.
I think it's very, very difficult for them to continue the Abraham Accords process given current circumstances. And even UAE is coming under a lot of pressure for its previous decision to join the Abraham Accords. Some of the diplomats were responding to criticism recently and defending their decision. I think it's impossible almost for them to Saudi Arabia to join it now, because although Saudi leaders may want to join the accord, and they may see political benefits in that as well. Um, it's very hard in the face of opposition from the Saudi public. And, the
Hmm.
Emirati population is smaller, it's more politically controlled. Saudi Arabia is, 20 something million people. Most of them are going to be on some level sympathetic to the Palestinians. They're seeing the same scenes everybody else is on Al Jazeera and other channels on social media. And, no one wants to be the person in the Muslim world who seems to be defending this at the moment. It's
Hmm.
a grim and ugly situation. And to side with it, I don't think that Mohammed bin Salman or anyone else wants to be, in that role. But, it's interesting. I think that there's still the incentive there because obviously Saudi Arabia would like to align with Israel and also get the benefits from that with the United States, its relationship in Congress and so forth. But Israel would have to be different than it is right now. It'd have to have some sort of conciliatory policy of the Palestinians, maybe something leading to the creation of two states, two-state solution in Israel Palestine. But I don't see that Israeli government is any position to do that. I don't think the tenor and trend of their politics is going that direction. I think it's going in a very opposite direction. So,
Hmm. Hmm.
given that reality, I think it's unlikely that Saudi Arabia is going to normalize. And there were some very interesting articles published by connected Saudi insiders after October 7th, sort of criticizing Israel for leading the situation to blowing up in this way and saying that we'd warned them that they need to have a solution with the Palestinians if they want to have a
Hmm.
relationship with us. And because I think that they don't want to do something which is so unpopular with their own people, and they're not going to do it just to win benefits in Congress and so forth.
Hmm. So this brings me to Pakistan. What's your sense, Murtaza? You're a very, very well connected person. What's your view of what the Pakistani government may be attempting to do vis-a-vis Israel, or what is the chatter in the U.S. as well?
Yeah, so I think that, in the current environment, you're not going to see any overt or covert rapprochement between Pakistan and Israel because of the exact same factors that exist in Saudi Arabia and are, in fact, even more pronounced in Pakistan, which is a country of 250 million people. Despite everything, it's still a very vigorous civil society in some ways. Can't really control that many people in a country like Pakistan. So you're not going to see any moves towards normalizing with Israel anytime soon. That said, it's interesting subject generally because it's obviously been discussed by Pakistani leaders to various degrees over the years. Most famously, Pervez Musharraf argued that it's something Pakistan should do. And I have thoughts about this, and I will explain it sort of in two phases in a way. On one hand, Israel and Pakistan do not have any territorial disputes, obviously. It's a very far away country on the Eastern Mediterranean. Pakistan doesn't really have any history or relationship with it directly, sort of an abstraction strategically from Pakistan's perspective. But they do have a policy of non-recognition of Israel, which has existed since independence, sort of in solidarity with the Arab world. So solidarity with the Arab League, and shared opposition, third worldist opposition to the creation of Israel, which was very pronounced for many many years. Now the world has obviously changed a lot in 70 years, and now many Arab countries have covert and even official overt ties with Israel at the moment, including close countries with close relationships to Pakistan, like the UAE and Bahrain and so forth. And likewise, Pakistan has never enjoyed reciprocal solidarity for its own issues. And I would say that no Arab country, to my knowledge, has ever cut ties with India over Kashmir, for instance, which is a very serious situation. Even in fact, nowadays, when the situation in Kashmir has escalated and gotten worse than ever since 2019, Arab countries have developed even closer ties with India, very warm ties with India, including under the Modi government. So
Hmm.
Pakistan has been doing the solidarity without any strategic benefit per se. And I mean the government, it's not
Hmm.
people contact. The Pakistani government's been doing this without any benefit. So at the same time, there are significant costs to this for Pakistan, not so much with Israel directly, but with the U.S. Congress, which former President Trump has said that Israel is very, very influential in Congress to almost an extreme degree, and I think
Hmm.
the analysis was pretty accurate. Pakistan suffers a lot for being seemingly intransigent on this subject as a result of that. So there's a cost to their policy as well too. Now, that said, some people will say then, well, we should, or Pakistani should normalize relations with Israel. But I actually don't think that that is also a good idea at the moment. First of all, due to the current,
Certainly not. Hmm.
yeah, first of all, due to the current situation, obviously in Gaza, which is abhorrent and no one can really defend. But also, if you think about Pakistan's diplomatic capital at the moment, it's probably never been lower. It's been
Hmm.
lowest, maybe it's been in decades, if
Hmm.
not the lowest ever in a sense. So if Pakistan were to do something like that under the next government, let's say it's Nawaz Sharif or someone like that, they would get very little out of this. And in
Hmm.
fact, it would be a bit embarrassing in the sense
Hmm.
that they would be capitulating on a subject that they have depicted as a moral stand for many, many years.
Hmm.
And because their position is so weak, they wouldn't really get any. There's no price that they can put on this that would be really worthwhile.
Hmm.
When you negotiate something, when you give a concession, you want something significant back.
Hmm.
Maybe if Pakistan was stronger, it could say, "Well, we'll give you recognition if you make a significant concession on the two-state solution for
Hmm.
Palestine." Give them something tangible they can work with, or we get F-16s from Congress, or something like that, something like this. And that's not going to happen right now.
Write off our 126 billion debt.
Yeah, right, exactly. So something which makes a meaningful difference. And I
Yeah.
would say that in the early 1990s, when India also did not have relations with Israel for many
Hmm.
many years,
Hmm.
when they recognized Israel, they did it at the end of the Cold War, when there was a
Hmm.
significant change in the strategic environment, and India was in a relatively good position to get benefits, or they
Hmm.
didn't have to be on right in the center. If Pakistan's going to do it, they should have done it in 1992. If they're not going to do it, don't do it today at all. Do it only in time you can benefit Palestinians, yourself in the course of that, and maybe that'll never come. In fact, as things are going. But people talk about this. I think it's really just hypothetical, and I don't foresee it happening. And I wouldn't recommend Pakistani leaders to do it if I was advising them either. I think it
Yeah.
would be a bad idea, and it would sacrifice whatever remaining political capital that Pakistan can enjoy globally at the moment.
Globally, absolutely true. And I think you put it really well, Mursad. I mean, there's a rational part to this argument, but there's a very strong emotional part to this argument, and they can be at cross purposes with each other or aligned, but one doesn't know. The interesting thing is, and I'm not like the Intercept, Murtaza, so my news is not as validated as yours. But just tell you what the grapevine has been telling me since Bajwa was the army chief and he went, and Asim now, and these are not rumors; these are chatter from within the Foreign Office of Pakistan and senior military circles that Pakistan has actually committed. When I say Pakistan, Bajwa had actually committed to the US, as has Asim, that we will recognize Israel, that we guarantee you, assure you, we're just looking for the right time and opportunity. So we've kind of, in a way, have been sold out by these two military generals without consulting, the people or taking into account exactly what you said. that there is a larger, greater good to be had, our political diplomatic capital is perhaps at
You
its
know,
lowest in it.
I wanted to say something too. One thing that I've heard, and you could take it for what's worth, is that there's been a lot of pressure to make Pakistan something like a package deal with Saudi Arabia. If Saudi Arabia were
Hmm.
to join the Abraham Accords, you can buy one get one free. Pakistan with that.
Oh, that's
I
amazing.
think that would
Oh,
be terrible. That would be terrible because Pakistan would sacrifice something which has been very important that they've depicted as a moral cause for many, many years, and without even their own sovereignty benefiting or their
mm,
own capital benefiting, let alone doing something on behalf of the Palestinians,
mm,
they would just be treated as an appendage to Saudi Arabia. They should
mm,
resist that as much as
mm,
they can, and I think there's
mm,
a very strong desire to be in the good books of the U.S. among Pakistani leaders. They're sort of intimidated by the Pentagon and things like that. But you have to think of the long term. And if there comes a day when they have good relations with Israel, it should be solving the Palestinian issue
yes.
really in a negotiated manner. It should be something which rewards Pakistani people for making a significant diplomatic change in their stature.
Mm,
It should not be for no reason. It should not be.
mm,
You should not sell your assets cheap
mm, mm,
for a
mm.
fire sale. You cannot be a 2-for-1 deal with Saudi Arabia or any other country.
Oh man, just even thinking of that when you said it, honestly, I cringed. I mean, can it be worse than that? But coming back to again Pakistan and Israel and the genocide and Ukraine, we know for a fact that Pakistan's been supplying ammunition to Ukraine, right? So that's now an open secret. You guys disclosed it. Lots of others have disclosed it. Is there a and I mean, I'm trying to kind of connect the dots. If Pakistan is subsidizing and replenishing the ammunition for Ukraine, does that give much more flexibility and opportunity for the US to supply the same ammunition to Israel? So is indirectly Pakistan also responsible? When I say Pakistan, it's really a decision by Asim Munir, nobody else. Is that Asim Munir is actually just is participating in this genocide in Gaza.
Well, it's hard to make a determination on that because it's such a incendiary conclusion to draw if it were the case, and you have to be very careful in making any conclusion like that. So I don't want to say that that is happening per se. I guess in an indirect way that if you're aiding the U.S. alliance's aims, if you were to characterize it that way, in Ukraine, theoretically, it would also take some slack off U.S. Provisions for the Israeli military. And I think recently there was a signing of order to provide more unguided artillery munitions to the Israeli military by the U.S. in the last week. So in a sense, there is that, and the U.S. industrial base is coming under significant strain, providing for two wars at once, and that could be a very important and serious issue in 2024. That said, I would need more information or proof to make a conclusion like that. I saw the Indian news outlets; some of them were making the speculation, but I thought this was like a psychological warfare. It didn't seem to have much substance behind the claims per se.
Here's what I'm saying, Murtaza, and I'm just doing a theoretical construct. The US has 1,155 millimeter howitzer shells, and it gives them to the Ukraine. It then Pakistan gives them another 500. So now they have 500, which they can from their own stockpile, not from the Pakistani stockpile, from their own stockpile. They now have that to give to Israel while not reducing the arms shipments to Ukraine. That's the theoretical construct I'm trying to draw.
Yeah, that's the thing. Weapons are fungible. Ammunition is fungible potentially.
Yeah.
So when you're helping in one sense, you are helping the broader goals of the country, which is supporting the Israeli military, which is engaging in very indiscriminate violence against civilians in Gaza. So I think that I would pause and consider that before doing so. We don't know if these transactions are still ongoing at the moment because our information is current up to a certain date. But if they are, it would be aiding that. You'd be aiding the general munition stockpiles of the U.S. and taking strain off in one theater to allow another theater to be intensified as well too. And I think that
Yeah.
we're all seeing the negative results of that at the moment in Gaza.
So, last question, Murtaza, I know you have to go. This is about the South African submission to the International Court of Justice, and I'm at the website here, and it says that the proceedings instituted by South Africa against the State of Israel on 29 December, public hearings to be held on Thursday, 11/12. Do you think there's any substance to this other than just the news headlines?
It's very interesting. I think that there is substance to it in the sense that it could theoretically it puts more strain and pressure on the edifice of the liberal international institutions over this subject. Now, what I mean by that is basically Israel's part of what you can say is the U.S. world order that has rules and laws in which it governs and so forth. To the extent that those laws are applicable in every case, quite debatable. But that's the whole ideological framework in which U.S. support for Israel's sovereignty and so forth is justified. Now, if the ICJ starts finding that Israeli officials are guilty of war crimes, even genocide in Gaza, and Israel ignores that and the US ignores that, then you're really blowing up the whole whatever edifice of this liberal international order still claims to exist. So I think it puts a lot of strain, and I think they'd be hesitant to sort of reject these or just ignore these rulings, the US and Israel, because if you start unraveling the system in that way, then where's it going to end? So I think they are concerned about it. I think they will be concerned. They're concerned on a very practical level that they are going to have difficulty traveling, certain Israeli officials, maybe even US officials in the future, because they have these rulings against them. And I think what could happen with Israel, rather than this leading to the collapse of the idea of international law, which is still very popular in many places, it could lead Israel, and I think this direction is going, unless better and more rational leadership emerges in Israel, which doesn't seem to be the case right now. They're going to be headed towards a North Korea-like direction, like an Iran-like direction, in the sense that they'll be very isolated from the rest of the world. They'll be very everywhere we go. Maybe it'd be difficult for Israelis to travel. It'd be difficult for their public officials to go different places. They'll have legal cases against them. That is the direction where things are heading. And I think they have two options at that point. They could support parties in Europe and the US, which want to just dissolve liberalism generally and move to some other sort of more, age of conquest, I don't know, put it, a pre-liberal order, which is more brutal and more nationalistic. And then they'll fit in well in that order. Or they could try to accede and placate the international courts and so forth, which also be very difficult. So I think that ultimately, they've done a lot of harm to Palestinians and Palestinian national hopes in the last 3 months, I would say. I think that the Palestinian outlook is probably as bleak as it's been since the creation of Israel in the 1940s. But this has also done a lot of harm to Israel itself, too. I think Israel's trajectory after this war is over, wherever it ends, is going to be very, very difficult strategically, but also politically, because this. If you look at the voting at the UN, it's only America which is siding with Israel at this point. There's almost uniform opposition to the continuing of this war. Even countries like India, which have ties with Israel, they're not voting. They're not willing to take the step of actually voting for Israel. Because they want to manage the relationship with the Arab world. So I think ultimately what's going to happen is that Israel becomes more and more authoritarian, more and more even insular, and bearing towards even something more extreme than authoritarianism, totalitarianism in the long term. And the Palestinians will be left to the mercy of that, unless there's some sort of visionary change where the world community steps in and forces a political solution on both sides, which I don't see happening anytime soon.
What do you think the change, if there is a Republican administration next year, do you think there'll be some change in American foreign policy towards Israel and Palestine?
I think it would become worse. I think it would become more extreme under Trump.
Really?
Remember
Really?
the Trump administration? He put Jared Kushner and
Yes,
Friedman
yes,
and
yes.
Greenblatt and all these people in charge of the Israel file. The most extreme right wing of the pro-Israel community, you could say, were given complete carte blanche to deal with this issue. I don't think Trump maybe cares that much, but he certainly is willing to let people like this run this issue, and he likes to be praised and feted by his people. So I think that If he comes to power, U.S. policy will become even more extreme on the subject, and they may try to help the settler movement in Israel colonize Gaza, continue accelerate colonization, expulsions of Palestinians from the West Bank, and perhaps even try to finalize the ethnic cleansing of the Gaza Strip of as many Palestinians as possible. I
Wow.
think that is a likely outcome if Trump is elected, or even DeSantis or Nikki Haley, one of these people. They're all even more extreme on this subject than the Democrats, unfortunately.
Wow. Thank you, Murtaza. Thank you, and I want to part by thanking you and the Intercept for this wonderful work that you people are doing in the world and exposing hypocrisy, telling the truth. And I found this article really interesting. I calculated how much of my money the U.S. sent to kill Palestinians. You can too, and I urged our readers and viewers who are watching this to go to the Intercept, click, read these stories. Please donate to the Intercept. It's a reader supported magazine. It frees itself from corporate greed and government support. And if you want to listen to Murtaza on a regular basis and hear from him, he's got his own email newsletter, and you can subscribe to that. Murtaza, thank you again. May God
Oh,
bless
no,
you.
my pleasure. Thank you so much.
And thank you. And may we see a better and just world in Palestine, in Pakistan, wherever there is repression and genocide. And may all those who are suffering, may their suffering be relieved, and all those who have died in this struggle for a better, just world, may their souls rest in peace. Uh, wishing you goodbye, Murtaza. Pakistan Zindabad, Pakistan Paindabad. Ilahi Amin. Assalamu alaikum. Khuda Hafiz. Thank you, Murtaza.
Thank you.